So welcome everyone. Today a session on GDPR and how it relates to analytics, especially in Europe. I have 3 chapters prepared. So first, a quick recap of GDPR and how it relates to marketing and what are the considerations to make. Then a topic on the analytics tools in 2023, so the actual landscape, the tools that we see in the market and that we are using. And then a topic on marketing mix modeling, which is a service that we also offer that can actually provide some marketing insights in this privacy-centric world now. I have about 30 slides, so we will keep a good pace because I also want to have the last 5 to 10 minutes to respond to any questions that you still have. So first, a recap of the actual GDPR. You probably already heard about personally identifiable information, PII, but what is now the difference with personal data? Well, actually, personal data is much wider than personally identifiable information. So personal data in the context of GDPR is actually all data that relates to individuals or to persons. So it's a very wide concept. It can be everything. If somebody has done a click, that's also personal data, even if it's completely anonymous and it can't be related to or identified to an actual individual. So it's even a random string of characters or numbers can be considered personal data, but it cannot be considered personally identifiable information. So PII is actually information that allows you at first glance to already identify a certain identity. So things like an email address or an actual name, but it's also including the combination of 2 different data points that you can use together to identify an identity. So it's kind of a concept that's not too straightforward, but I have some examples on that later in the presentation. So what is sensitive personal data? So this is still something else than PII actually. Sensitive personal data is things that relate to your medical history or your health, fingerprints, judicial file, race or origin, sexual behavior or preference, political preference, religious beliefs, union membership, stuff like this. So this is clearly sensitive personal data, and if you are processing sensitive personal data, there are other things that you have to keep in mind when it relates to GDPR, and you also have to be more careful in terms of security and asking consent, basically. But so what's most important related to the subject of today, to analytics, is IDs. So you see here in personal data, a device ID, a Facebook ID, an IP address can also be considered personal data, and even PII. But I will explain later. So in some cases, IP addresses can really be personally identifiable information. So when we look at ourselves in our businesses and we have to make a decision related to how sensitive is certain data, or are we really processing personal data that can be used to identify individuals, you always have to keep in mind what the goal of the GDPR legislation actually is. And it's really protecting the identities of EU citizens. But so you always have to be pragmatic when doing this. So for example, an IP address to us in our business is not personally identifiable information because we don't have actually access to a database that links an IP address to an actual identity. But in the case of, for example, an internet service provider like Telenet or VOO, these businesses actually have a database where they can see which IP addresses are used by which customers. So to Telenet or VOO, an IP address can actually be personally identifiable information. And there has actually been a judge that made this ruling in Germany that to ISPs, IP addresses should be considered PII. But so it's not the same in every case, but to most of our businesses, if we are not internet service providers, usually the IP address is personal data, but it's not PII. So that's a consideration to make. Another aspect of GDPR is the aspect of legitimate interest. So basically, the legitimate interest says that when you are in marketing and you're using personal data for direct marketing purposes, there is a clause included that it may be regarded as carried out for a legitimate interest. So it's kind of in the gray zone here what you can and cannot do with personal data, but I will give some more clear examples. So you have to be considering the true goal of GDPR. And so GDPR is about protecting the rights of consumers, and the fines are really only going to more serious infractions. So for example, if you are being targeted with an online advertising campaign, so you're receiving an ad impression, because a consumer is in an audience of a website that he visited before, it's definitely not a serious abuse of the user rights. So the legitimate interest principle that we talked about before, in my opinion, does apply. And this is now because you visited a website before, but especially if you're already a client of a business, I would say that then definitely the legitimate interest principle applies. So as long as the user is in full control of his or her data, and the consent can be withdrawn and the data can be asked to be deleted, and also the data is adequately protected, there's probably not an issue regarding GDPR. Now, we're talking today mostly about the analytics environment in Europe, especially. So what is the one of the principles that we have to understand is that data is transferred abroad in a lot of cases. And so data transfers to the European Economic Area, which is the EU plus Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway. So as long as you stay in those boundaries, there are actually no obstacles, and you can just transfer data abroad without any issues. Now, when you want to transfer data out of this European Economic Area, then there are certain countries that are trusted. So the list here, Switzerland, Andorra, etc. Then there are also countries that are not trusted, like the United States. I'm sure you all heard of the Privacy Shield being invalidated by the Schrems II ruling. And so this is basically the issue. There's currently no legislation, no agreement between the US and the EU that adequately protects the personal data of EU citizens. So currently, we are really already for more than 2 years in a state where personal data going to the United States is actually not legal. There are also other countries, but there, if you implement corporate rules and the EU Commission model clauses, you can still do the transfer of the personal data to these countries. But so this is an actual timeline of what is happening with the data transfers going abroad. So in May 2016, GDPR went into force. May 2018, GDPR was actually being applied, enforced. Then in July 2020, the Privacy Shield was invalidated. So the EU-US data transfers were deemed illegal by the Schrems II ruling. So Schrems II is actually a German individual called Max Schrems, who is really fighting for the privacy of EU citizens. And he's actually taking on, well, the legislative branch and the GDPR itself, and really fighting basically for our rights. So this, of course, is a situation. So no legal data transfers between the EU and the US. That's not very good for neither the US or the EU. So on October 2022, Biden actually signed an executive order to implement a new agreement so that they could start working on a new version of the Privacy Shield. Now, in December 2022, so only 4 months ago, the EU Commission has proposed a new draft, Privacy Shield 2.0 is called, that now has to be ruled valid or invalid in a later phase. But so what the EU Commission did was already asking one of the EU branches, so the European Data Protection Board, or the EDPB, to give their opinion on the new version of the Privacy Shield agreement. And so basically, I read the agreement a few days ago. The summary is that there are improvements to the first version of the Privacy Shield, but it's rather limited. So the summary of the opinion of the EDPB is basically that concerns remain. So what has already happened is that Max Schrems has published his opinion in an open letter. There's the link inside that you can later also check out yourself. But it basically says that he is very skeptical that the new Privacy Shield will not end up like the previous Privacy Shield, because it's very easy for Biden and von der Leyen to make new legislation. But the issue before was that the intelligence agencies based in the US basically don't have enough legal boundaries to be able to access personal data, even of EU citizens. And so unless the laws are actually changed in the US, he and we don't really see a reason why the Privacy Shield 2.0 would not end up in the same way as the first version of the Privacy Shield. So we will see how it now evolves in the next months, years, because this stuff can definitely take a while. But so we are also quite skeptical that the new Privacy Shield will end up basically like the previous one. So our current advice to clients is basically be reminded that GDPR is a risk exercise. And what I mean by that is that it's very difficult to 100% comply with GDPR. So it's a risk versus investment exercise that you have to do. And for very large businesses that are also processing sensitive data like insurance companies, pharma, banking, I would say that you have to take it much more seriously than an SME that's just starting out. There's a very different risk appetite, basically, that you have to consider. So what's also important is in each of the countries, there is a data protection authority. I have the link to the Belgian one here in the slides. And they also publish all of the actual decisions that they make in each of the countries. And so right now, the Belgian DPA is not really going after infractions regarding the data transfers to the US. So no fines are being handed out. Now, this might change. And I also know that in some other countries, there have been some decisions that force a certain company to stop doing the data transfers. But right now in Belgium, it's not the case. Also, what you will see if you read some of these decisions on the website of the Belgian DPA is that a fine is never the first tool that is being used. It's always first advising and giving the information that, well, hey, you are not compliant. This is what you need to fix. And a fine is usually only given in a later phase or for very, very serious infractions where there's clearly abuse going on. But so if you want, you can always keep up to date with the actual publications on the Belgian DPA website. So in the meantime, what we suggest to focus on is to comply at least with the rest of the GDPR. So giving users complete and full control of their data, having a consent management platform that's properly configured. So not just a cookie pop-up, but really a cookie pop-up that gives you the ability to give consent per cookie or per tracking, basically. Make sure that you have all processing agreements in place, data breach scenarios in place, a proper cookie and privacy policy. And then in case you're processing sensitive data, you really have to go the extra mile in securing everything and also making sure that you have everything very well documented. So I don't see any questions yet. If you have any questions, I'll be sure to answer those right after the webinar, so feel free. So now the next topic is the actual analytics tools in 2023. So the country DPA, so the data protection authorities in each of the European countries, several of them have now decided that Google Analytics isn't legal. So basically because Google Analytics is transferring your personal data to the US. That's the bottom of the issue. As you can see, there's already 8 decisions by the DPAs that say the same thing. Well, more or less, it's pretty much the same thing. But so what is the problem? So as we said, there's currently no legal framework to transfer EU personal data to the US, but that's not the only thing. What is also happening is in the US, you have the Cloud Act, which is basically an act that can force any US-based company to give access to whatever data this company has, even when the data is not stored in the US. So it's not just related to the data transfers. Preferably, you also don't want to work with a US-based company for any technology that processes personal data, basically. And so even though today the data protection authorities are very focused on Google Analytics, it actually goes much wider or much broader than that. You have to really consider your entire marketing tech stack, because yeah, it's just the basis of the internet is everything uses IP addresses to communicate and to transfer data. So if you are hosting your website on Amazon Web Services and you have a form on the website where people can enter the email address or stuff like this, it's also impacted. And so even other tools from Google, like Google Tag Manager, is also using IP addresses. So the authorities are very focused on Google Analytics right now because it's one of the most widely used analytics tools, and pretty much all websites use it. But Google Tag Manager is actually also quite widely being used. So it's not just Google Analytics. You have to really consider your entire tech stack when looking into the privacy concerns of your marketing. So right now, the landscape, there are other players, but these are the big ones. You have Adobe Analytics, which is well customizable, also not cheap, but it's a decent solution with a lot of customization possible. Then you have Piwik Pro, Matomo, which are originated from the same company, but that are European or at least not US-based companies. Then you have, of course, Universal Analytics, which will be phased out in a few months. So everyone is now looking into Google Analytics 4 to basically move from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4. But so there are actually a lot of issues with that. So if you look at these 4 different tools, so I also split Matomo in Matomo on-premise and cloud, and the same thing for Piwik Pro Free versus Piwik Pro Enterprise, because there are differences here. But so basically, when concerning privacy, you have to consider the country that the company is based in for the Cloud Act, the cloud server location. So where are the actual servers where the data is residing? Whether there is a private cloud server location. So some of these analytics tools you can really run on your private server without any other company to have access to the server. Where the data, well, in case of on-premises, so using your own server where the data resides, and then the data retention. So basically for Matomo on-premise, so Matomo, both on-premise and Matomo Cloud, are New Zealand-based companies. The cloud server location for on-premise, of course, is on your own server, so it depends on where your server is. But so for Matomo Cloud, it's in Germany. For Piwik Pro Core Free, it's also in Germany. For Piwik Pro Enterprise, you can actually select different data centers all over the world. And so you have some in Germany. There's sufficient options in the European Union, actually. Also, Adobe Analytics, you can choose your server. So it can be a EU server, but the company is still based in the US. So when concerning the Cloud Act, it's still something that we would probably avoid if privacy is very important to you. And of course, Google Analytics 4 is a US-based company with servers residing in the US. So from a privacy perspective, Google Analytics 4 is definitely not a very good option right now. So the data retention, this basically says how long the data can be kept on the server. So from Matomo, there's no limit. For the free version of Piwik, there's 14 months. For the enterprise version, you can push it for as far as you like, so there's no limit. For Adobe Analytics, it's 25 months, but you can pay for additional features to also make this longer. And for Google Analytics 4, For user and event data, it's only 14 months, and for the other data, it's longer. So right now, in our opinion, and this is also what we are advising to clients, if you are in a business, in a large business that finds privacy very important, we really advise using Piwik Pro. Matomo is also fine, but it doesn't have the features that Piwik Pro has. So if you have a small blog, yes. If you have an e-commerce website or a big corporate website with thousands of visitors per day, and especially if you're using Google Ads, for example, it's not a good option. There's just not enough functionality. Piwik Pro also has a tag manager in the same solution and a consent manager. So you can do these 3 different things all with one tag, which is really easy to set up. There's a lot of advanced options. In Piwik Pro, there's no data sampling. You can do retroactive data manipulation. It's fully GDPR compliant, of course. There's also a lot of features for data deletion requests. So if you receive a request for a user to delete data, you can do that. There's import functionality for Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager, so you can make the switch quite easily. And it's also, well, because there's a tag manager and a consent manager in one tool, it's also better for GDPR compliance, because under GDPR, there's also the principle of data minimization. Basically, if you can avoid transferring data outside of your own business, you should. So just because they offer these 3 different functionalities, it means that you don't have to use another tag manager or another consent manager, which is actually better because you just have less data going outside. Piwik also has a lot of settings for cookieless tracking, so you can use device fingerprinting, you can use cookies, of course, all based on your risk appetite, because this is also kind of in the gray zone of what tracking is. There's more options to do IP anonymization. So in Google Analytics, I think it's just the last thing that's being anonymized, but here you can really choose different levels. Do you want to anonymize the entire IP address or just a part of it? There's also the option to use a 30-minute cookie. So if people don't give consent in the consent manager, you can still drop a cookie that self-deletes after 30 minutes. And also from the Piwik server, the privacy sensitive bits are also deleted. But so this gives you the option to still have a full data set in your analytics tool, even when people don't consent, without really the privacy implications. So it's a good option, but also based on your risk appetite. You can still collect some data without using cookies. So everything will be masked, anonymized, but you're still tracking something. And then there's the option to don't collect any data at all for people that don't accept any tracking in the consent manager. So if you're completely playing the game completely white hat, you just want to make sure that you're completely fine with GDPR legislation, you can always say don't collect any data, and that will just be the last of that. Another feature is that you can actually collect data from your own server on your own domain. So if you're looking at the Google Tag Manager script, it always pushes data to the Google servers, of course. But what you can do at Piwik is push this data to your own servers. And so in that sense, a lot of the tracking prevention in Safari or Firefox will not block as much tracking. So you're also able to just track more. What you can also do is using secure cookies. So basically, a secure cookie makes sure that you don't have any data pollution in Google Analytics, which is happening a lot of times, because all of the it's using HTTPS to make sure that doesn't happen. So marketing mix modeling. So this is actually a service that we offer at CLICKTRUST under a spin-off that's called LICTA. And LICTA is not just doing the media mix modeling, they're also doing the consultancy and actually helping customers with strategy, multi-channel strategy. And I have some very, very cool examples later, but the basic idea is that media mix modeling doesn't depend on tracking. So media mix modeling uses statistics to find correlations between the spend in one channel and the impact on the hard conversions overall. And so usually what is enough to do media mix modeling is to really have by channel an Excel file with two columns. One is day and the other one is spend by day. And so by just merging all of the spend data by day of all of these channels, and from the other side, the actual hard conversions that happen, you can really model what channels are working and which ones aren't. So what it actually does is it can provide very clear answers that cookie-based tracking or analytics tools just can't answer. So things like, what is the ideal media mix? What is the optimal level of investment for a certain channel? How can we optimize the channel? And how many sales would we have if we stop advertising? So the natural sales. So here is an example of the response decomposition by predictor. So here you can really say, so for each of the channels, how much impact does it have? And it's not even just for the channels. You can even have an effect on how much of an impact did the promotion have. Even TV and radio campaigns or digital out of home campaigns that we did for this client, you can really get an idea of the impact of that, which is just something that cookie-based attribution or analytics tools can't do. And so here, for example, we were doing Amazon ads, and Amazon ads also don't show up in your Google Analytics. But for this client, we actually saw that it has a very good cost per conversion comparing to the other channels, of course, on Amazon sales or sales in general. And so it's just a very interesting way of analyzing the impact of media channels, both online and offline. Also, SEO can be included, the context. So sometimes there's a pandemic happening in the market that you can also really calculate the effect of. What it also does is finding the maximum investment that makes sense. So here you clearly have a tipping point at an investment of 5,000 euros per week, where you see that you just have a diminishing return in terms of what the additional investment would bring in sales, basically. So we offer this service in 3 packages. So the full marketing mix modeling or media mix modeling, we offer at 33K per year, which includes the media mix model, but also 3 refreshes, because you can continuously update the actual models. But then we also have some smaller products. So Drive to Web, for example, only costs 3K, and this basically allows you to see for a radio or a TV campaign or a mass media campaign, how much traffic did it bring to my website and how much sales resulted from that. And then we also have advanced A/B tests. So basically, if you want to do a test in which you expose one province in Belgium to an advertising campaign and another province you don't expose to the advertising campaign, what is the difference and how can we calibrate also the model to make sure that we have that we are attributing the right amount of impact to a certain media mix or a channel mix. So that was it. I see we're already 3 minutes over time, so I propose we get to the questions. So one of the questions is, can you please share the slides after the webinar? Yes, definitely. I will definitely do that. Jean-François is asking for Matomo Cloud and Piwik Procore and their cloud server location. Do they own the servers location in Europe, or do they host outside? Both are possible. So they actually give the, so I'll just get back to the slides because it's actually in there. I probably went over it quite fast. So there are data centers in Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, Singapore, or the US. You can have a private cloud server location. So here you have Azure, also AWS or Elastic's, which is also a data center in Sweden. And then, of course, you can also just host it on your own server. So not hiring anything, not renting anything from Piwik. It's just your own server. They help you with the deployment on your own server, and that's basically it. So in terms of Piwik, you can basically do whatever you want. All of the possibilities are there. Okay, I hope that that answered your question. Any other questions? No? Okay, then I guess it's all clear. If you would still think of a question, don't hesitate to just hit me up on LinkedIn. I will try to do my best to answer your questions. Okay, thank you everyone. Stopping the webinar. Bye.